In this video, I will be attempting to survive 100 days in Scotland in hardcore Minecraft. This means that I'll have to survive the real animals that live there, while I also explore the wonders that this land has to offer. Oh, and I will be hunting 4 of Scotland's most famous mythical creatures. But with that being said, let's get started. I spawned in and saw that I was near a forest. And a lot of squirrels. Hi. Yeah. What can I do for you? I decided not to eat the squirrels, as I can't imagine squirrel meat is all that good. So with that being said, I instead went and got some wood, which I used to craft a pickaxe, and then I crafted some stone tools. Now it was time for me to explore a bit, as my next objective is to craft a bed before nightfall. But as I walked through these woods, I saw water ahead, and it was clear to me that I was at one of Scotland's many lochs. See, lochs are the same as lakes, just Scottish, and due to Scotland's geography, there are over 30,000 different lochs to see. Regardless, I rode my way across these waters, only it wasn't long until something massive came into view. Whoa. What is this? I approached the castle cautiously, as I could see that there were name tags within it, and shortly after, I saw the source of these name tags. That is interesting. Okay. Within the castle there was lots of food, and also some wool. So I collected it and crafted a bed. Yet as I made my way up the castle, I accidentally placed this bed down, and when I went to destroy it, the bed fell all the way down to the night below. Alright, he's distracted. Soon enough, the night left, so I jumped down, collected my bed, and ran. Yeah, I knew I'd have to come back to the castle eventually, but for now, I needed to do some mining. So I did just that, right as the sun started to set. Next morning, I set off to find a spot for my base. I decided to go by loch, and as I did, I realized that I couldn't craft any water bottles, as I didn't see any sand nearby. So I just kept on moving across the loch, only the terrain around me started to get really hilly. I climbed one of these nearby hills, thinking it would be a good spot for my base, but that's when a large mountain came into view, and I quickly realized just what mountain it was. Ben Nevis. At over 4,400 feet, or over 1,300 meters, this is the tallest mountain in the United Kingdom. With its iconic shape and smooth slopes, Ben Nevis is a great start for climbers who might be inexperienced, depending on the trail you take, of course. All I know is that I'm not quite equipped to climb it just yet. No, in fact, I was out of water, and dangerously so. Yeah, I needed to get to the ocean so I could collect some sand and craft water bottles, so I headed back down to the water and started rowing. Only as the night approached, I noticed that there were some new creatures out and about, like these undead knights. Regardless, on day 3, I saw the muddy floor below me change into a much sandier one, meaning that I was near the coast. So I went to collect the sand, only as I did, I heard a rather unpleasant noise. I smelted the sand and crafted some bottles, before finally drinking some loch water. Yeah, this is definitely not advised. Anyways, I headed back towards Ben Nevis, as I wanted to build my base in the mountain range nearby. However, that's when I spotted yet another structure. I took a few of these decorations before heading into the stone tower. Inside this chest was a piece of steel, which I was unfamiliar with, and also some arrows and a bow. I then climbed to the top of the tower, only to see that there was, well, nothing up here. So I opted to keep going, as I reached the mountains that night. And the next morning, I slowly weaved my way through this vast forest. Soon enough, I came into this valley that had a loch, and I knew that this was the perfect place for my base. So I climbed up this nearby hill and started collecting stone, as I would need a lot of it for this base. See, I was planning on making a castle-themed mini-golf course, as Scotland is credited for inventing golf. And yes, this mini-golf course will be functional, However, as I gathered resources, I almost ran right into this snake, which was likely an adder. Soon enough, I had a lot of the area cleared, and I decided to use my steel to craft a steel shovel, which somehow has 12 attack damage. Yeah, that's more than my axe. Anyways, I continued my base building into the next morning, and as I do so, let me explain what my objective is for this video. See, Scotland is known for its incredible scenery, history, and of course, folklore. That's why I will be hunting 4 of Scotland's most famous mythical creatures in this video, starting with a rather terrifying one, the Caoineag. The Caoineag is very similar to a banshee. However, this weeping spirit is found in the Highlands and Hebrides, often beside a body of water. It's said that her wailing is an omen of death for those who hear it, so let's hope I can defeat this ancient creature before the torrent of death rushes my way. But for now, I wanted to get some of my base finished and at least outline the first 2 mini-golf holes. So that's what I got to work on, before seeing an amazing sunset. Only I was then reminded not to stay up once the sun has set.
What is that?
Next morning, I continued my building. I also tried to craft the golf equipment, but came to a bit of an issue.
See, that's just not a block though, is it?
Regardless, I was able to craft my golf club before then doing some mining and finding some iron. On day 7, I finished the layout of the first hole and was honestly pretty happy with my progress. So I decided that this would be my last day of base work before heading out to hunt the Caoineag. And so the next morning, I took one last look at my base and headed west. See, my goal was to hunt it in the Outer Hebrides, which are these islands right here. That way I can also see some of the countryside on my journey. And as I passed Ben Nevis, I realized that this would be a very scenic trip. On day 9, I continued along the beautiful countryside. That is, until this thunderstorm started up. But I have a Caoineag to hunt, so I carried on. Only the undead knights started to attack me, and yeah, I was getting really low. And then I saw this creature.
I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy whatever that creature is. That's... Oh, yeah, I forgot you could climb. What do they even do? Are they getting closer?
But when I woke up the next morning, they were gone. So I just kept on my way, still with only 1 heart. But as I reached the ocean, I was actually able to heal back up. I also collected some sand for my golf course before beginning my ocean journey. As I rode, I thought about what to expect with the Caoineag, as I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. Either way, I spotted some large mountains that evening, and I wondered if I had already reached the Outer Hebrides. But the next morning, as I found this river to follow, I realized that this was not the Outer Hebrides, but rather the Isle of Skye. And that meant that just around this corner was something rather special. So I rowed my boat up to this river next to the large stony mountains, until I came across some pools of water. The fairy pools are a group of waterfalls and pebble-lined pools that stretch down this scenic mountainside. These pools contain water that's not only incredibly clear, but also quite cold. Yet that doesn't stop people from taking a swim in them, as this is a popular place to take photos. Surrounded by not only the awe-inspiring landscape of the Coolin Mountains, but also a plethora of local folklore and mythology, the fairy pools are a destination in Scotland that you absolutely must visit. I decided to take a swim in them, and yeah, the view was really amazing. Yet as I left the pools, I saw this otter nearby, and decided that I wanted it as my companion. So I crafted a knife and collected some straw in order to craft a lead. And now I had my very own companion for Scotland. Next morning, my otter friend and I reached the western side of the Isle of Skye. That rhymed. Anyways, now we were certainly getting closer to the Outer Hebrides, as only one stretch of ocean separated us from them. However, as I spotted a church in the distance, I knew we would have to make one more stop. The loot inside was fine, but as we explored the crypt next door, I found that the loot over here was actually much better, like this iron pickaxe. Regardless, we continued down the hillside and had now reached the coast.
You know what I think I'll call you? I think I will name you Ewan, after my favorite Scottish actor. For those of you who know, well, you know.
Ewan and I rowed across the sea as I realized the threat of the Caoineag inched closer. And that night, the Outer Hebrides came into view. On day 13, we continued along the coast, and after finding a forest, I knew I couldn't bring Ewan with me any further.
Alright, Ewan. I need you to stay here, okay? Because I don't want you to get into trouble, so...
And with that, the hunt was on. I traversed the rocky landscape as the day carried on, but it wasn't until that evening that I actually saw something. Only it wasn't a Caoineag. In fact, I couldn't tell what it was. That is, until I walked right up to it. Then I realized that I had found Scotland's very own Stonehenge. See, the Calanais Stones are not only an archaeological mystery, but they actually predate Stonehenge. These mysterious stones date back about 5,000 years ago, and were abandoned for most of that time. And what's even stranger is that there are other stone circles nearby. Yeah, we still don't know why they were placed here and in this formation, but many theories and myths surround this monumental testament to human history that sits right here on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. I explored the stones the next morning and found the whole site to be really interesting.
But it's interesting because there's one in Turkey. There's, of course, Stonehenge. I think it's Turkey. I think it's Turkey where there's another one. But what do they mean? What do they symbolize, right?
But I had a hunt to embark on, and so I rode my way into this nearby mountainous loch, just as the rain began. And it was here, in this loch, that I not only found an abundance of dead fish, but also an eerie set of stone ruins. So I decided to set up camp on the other side of the loch. As I cooked my fish, I also sorted through my inventory. Yet that's when I noticed a red light emanating from the ruins across the loch. Naturally, I had to check it out. So, I rode my way over there. Only to see that these redstone torches were the cause of the light. While I was here, I went ahead and looked through the barrels and found some decent loot. I frantically looked around the area, as it could have gone anywhere, but that's when I realized it was already dark. I hopped back in my boat and started rowing, and then I stopped dead in my tracks. There were many of these creatures now surrounding the loch, and I had no choice but to inch closer to this one, until I eventually just went for it. Next morning, I headed back out to the ruins, as it wasn't raining anymore. However, the Caoineag was nowhere to be found, so I just searched the nearby mountains instead, and gathered some stone while I was at it. With no other plan, I headed back to my camp, assuming that I would have to wait for dusk. While I was here, I made some iron armor, and then the sun began to set. I reluctantly headed back out to the ruins, only this time, I almost immediately heard the scream. That's when I figured it out. She vanishes whenever I look directly at her. So, with that in mind, I rode around the loch while I thought of a plan. And eventually, I came up with one, albeit not a graceful one. I climbed up on top of the ruins and placed this TNT that I had found. While I waited for her to appear again, I fought some spiders as they climbed up towards me. And then, I heard it. The sound of something running around below me, waiting to attack. So I quickly lit the TNT and towered up. And my plan actually worked. I had successfully defeated the Caoineag, even if I had to do so by destructive means. But I had no time to think about that, as a ridiculous amount of creatures now dotted the hillside. So I just went back to my camp. With the Caoineag defeated, it was now time for me to collect Eowyn and head home to do some more base work and see what creature is next. So that's just what I set off to do. I found Eowyn around midday and returned east across the sea. We made it back to the Isle of Skye the next day, and I decided to disembark with Eowyn so we could walk across the land for a bit. This part of the isle was very cliffy and rocky. Yeah, it was definitely harder to traverse this kind of terrain while leading a mob. But soon enough, something tall came into view, and I almost immediately recognized it as the Isle of Skye's iconic rock formation. The Old Man of Storr encapsulates both the unpredictable landscape and mythical whimsy that Scotland has to offer. Even though this rocky anomaly was formed by natural means, the Old Man of Storr takes the shape of both an old scraggly man and a giant's thumb. Whichever path of folklore you choose to believe is entirely up to you, but this mythical rock is exactly why I love Scotland. Everything here has a myth surrounding it. Eowyn and I climbed up to get a good view, and that we did. Now, the next few days involved a lot more scenic travel, and Scotland's natural landscape just can't be understated. Everything from the forests to the mountainsides to the very water that flows through them. It's unlike anywhere I've been in this series. But an air of familiarity returned to me as I reached my base on the evening of day 21. And so that means the next morning, I got right to work. I started building up this front gate for my first mini-golf hole, before then doing a lot of mining. I still needed to find diorite for the golf ball, so I kept an eye out. And on day 23, I did even more mining. So while I do that, let's go ahead and discuss the next mythical creature on my list. And luckily for me, this one is friendly, albeit the only friendly one on my list. And that is, of course, the will-o'-the-wisp. Wisps, or will-o'-the-wisps, are magical apparitions of light, found in the woodlands and moors throughout Scotland. These whimsical lights have varying folklore surrounding them, as in some stories, they are playful tricksters, and in others, they are helpful guides that will lead someone to a treasure. My personal favorite take is that they're souls stuck in an earthly purgatory. Either way, I certainly look forward to finding one. Next morning, I made the path to the third golf hole. I also cleaned up my work a bit, and that evening, as I entered my mines, I had quite a close call with this undead knight. This prompted me to wear some more armor. And the next day, I did hole number 2, and completed this roof above it. I also placed some obstacles and was really liking how this was coming along, which is why I decided day 26 would be my last day of base work for a bit. I started on the third hole and wanted this one to be curved and have a bridge going over it. I also ended up breaking my steel shovel today. Yes, I was quite sad. But that sadness left as the next morning, I got ready to go and find some wisps. My plan for this one was to head to southern Scotland, right around the Galloway forest. And unfortunately, that means I will be leaving Ewan here, as I'll have to go through a lot of dense forestry for this one. Before I left, I made him a little room in this tower, and then I went fishing so that I had some travel food. Only I heard yet another eerie noise. Opting to continue forward, I walked my way to this snowy area by the afternoon, and I saw one of my favorite sunsets yet. Next day, I went down and into this river. I rode through this scenic area until I spotted a small cottage. I took some of these lanterns on the outside as there wasn't really anything on the inside. But when I went to get back into my boat, I saw that a small friend had taken my spot. I decided to just row with this turtle. That is, until he almost killed me that afternoon. Yeah, I kicked him out of my boat the next morning, and then I continued on my path south. Only it wasn't long until I saw something in the distance. I climbed the treetops to get a better view, and, well, the outline of a large castle appeared in front of me. Stirling Castle is one of the most important castles in Scottish history, as it sits right between the Highlands and the Lowlands. According to Britannica, the site this castle is built on is not only an ancient extinct volcano, but this very land has been occupied by a fortress since prehistoric times. With most of the buildings here dating back to the 1400s, the word I would associate with this royal establishment is legendary. I walked around the plazas and corridors of the castle before deciding that I was going to wait here tonight and see what the deal was with these strange creatures that I kept seeing. So I did just that, and as one spawned before me, I approached it. The creature appeared translucent as I neared it, so I figured I should try shooting it from afar, and well, it actually worked. In fact, I was able to quickly kill it. Yeah, to be honest, this only left me with more questions. But I had wisps to find, so on day 30, I made my way south through this forest. Soon enough, I reached this large open field, and I really liked the scenery here. But when I saw ruins in the distance, I knew I had to explore them. I took a look through this abandoned town, before stopping by this well to refill my water. That's when I discovered it wasn't exactly abandoned. Yeah, I quickly took care of this pillager before destroying a spawner nearby. I then went around the ruins and collected a few things for my base, before heading further south, knowing that I was now in the Scottish lowlands. As I walked through these open fields the next morning, I saw some wildlife, and upon seeing that they were boars, I knew I had to be near Galloway. I went ahead and killed one so I could get some pork, but I just ended up getting chased. Okay. And yeah, they hit hard. Ooh, okay. Alright. After being hit yet again, I decided to take my leave. Okay, I'm done. The Scottish countryside was covered in a blanket of rain as I made my way through this forest. Some hilly mountains then came into view, and I realized that I had already reached my location. I was in the Galloway Forest. Galloway Forest Park is a beautiful forest in southern Scotland, where you can go not only to find your typical Scottish wildlife, like red deer and squirrels, but also wild goats. But beyond the wildlife, Galloway Forest Park is the largest forest in the entire UK, and is one of the best places in the UK to see the starry sky. On day 32, I found this large loch and just decided to follow it. I knew the wisps would be easier to see at night, so for now I just kept exploring. I saw some swans on the water and then headed into the forest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I quickly placed my water and healed up, before seeing another adder. Now, adders are the only venomous snake in the entire United Kingdom, but they are somewhat common in Scotland. Adders aside, the sun was setting, so that meant it was time for me to head out and find some wisps. I searched the forest by treetop, but didn't see any lights. Yet, as I neared this mountain, I saw a long string of lights going up the middle of it. I figured these must be path lights, but my train of thought was soon interrupted, as mobs spawned all around me. However, as I reached the trail of lights, I realized that these certainly were not path lights. This might just be the fastest hunt in the history of this channel. Anyways, I followed this trail, as if you remember, one of the myths that surrounds wisps is that they lead you to a treasure of some kind. This was tough though, as not only were mobs attacking me, but I was freezing. After a long night of slow progress, I finally reached the summit. I saw this stone pillar, but also accidentally tamed this pigeon. Well, he's my second companion now, I guess. Loot inside the chest was really great, and contained Scotland's national dish, which is haggis. However, I had to hold my ground, as spiders surrounded me, and I just had to keep fighting them off. Soon enough, I was able to sleep, and I woke up the next morning with not a lot of health, and a desire to get home. My pigeon followed me as we made our way through the forest, and now with the wisp having been found, it was time to head home and see what creature was next. That afternoon, we saw some of Galloway's wild goats, and the next morning, I came up with a good name for my pigeon. I decided to call him Diorite, because of the way the block looks. Once again, those who know, well, you know. The rest of the day was a lot of walking, but on day 35, I saw either a river or a loch, and I wanted to follow it. I noticed that Diorite had trouble swimming, so I put him in the boat with me. Now, why a pigeon would try to swim instead of fly is beyond me. But Diorite and I continued into the highlands. Only that afternoon, I saw something that didn't quite blend in with the landscape. This flag gave it away as I realized it was a golf hole. Now obviously it looked nowhere near as good as my course, but the next morning I decided to give it a go. I discovered that the golf ball definitely has a limited amount of hits, but I also figured out how to tally the score. Oh, and there was a golf cart here. Yeah, I absolutely love this thing. I collected a few things from this course, including the cart, before continuing north up this smaller river. But it wasn't long until the river filtered out into a much wider body of water. At first, I thought it was the ocean. However, it didn't take long for me to notice that I was in Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond is Scotland's largest lake, but not in volume. No, we'll cover that one later. This loch is rather famous, as it was featured in the 1841 song, The Bonny Banks of Loch Lomond. However, songs aside, Loch Lomond is known for its sights as well, and its historic castles and villages, like the village of Luss. I continued moving up the loch the next day, and shortly after, I left to go by land. As Diorite and I made our way along the countryside, a tall tower came into view. Yet, as we approached it, I could hear many undead knights within. The loot inside was fine, but as I started to climb the spiral staircase within, I got quite the jump scare. Yeah, there were lots of them, but I led them all outside where, well, they started to burn to death. I then continued back up the stairs, where I ended up meeting a very fast one. But I couldn't actually hit this one, which led to a ridiculously close call. I got away fast, and then healed up. But at least the sunset was worth it. And yeah, if you couldn't tell by now, I quite like my sunsets. We finally reached my base on the afternoon of day 38, and I introduced Diorite to Ewan, before getting right to work. On day 39, I worked a lot on hole 3, and made the path to the next hole as well. It was a lot of digging, mostly, and that didn't change much the next day. So while I dig up the entirety of Scotland, let's discuss the next mythical creature on my list, because this one is very dangerous. Kelpies are malevolent, evil creatures that take the appearance of a horse. They're often found near lochs or rivers, waiting to drag their next victim underwater. See, many stories tell of these creatures trapping travelers on their backs as they plunge into the murky depths, bringing travelers to their watery graves. I will have to exercise extreme caution around this one. But I still had some base work to do, as I built up this tower that afternoon. And the next morning, I finished it, before getting to work on the 4th hole. This is when I realized that I certainly will not be able to do the traditional 18 holes. But this brings me to day 42, which is my last day for now. I worked on the 4th hole and added this windmill, that I will definitely make more windmilly later. But the next morning, I had other priorities, as I had decided that I will be hunting the Kelpie right next door at Loch Lomond. This way I can take both Ewan and Diorite with me, and so that I did. And while the travel was tougher with these two, we did end up making it to the tower that afternoon. Out of curiosity, I did climb up to the top to see the loot, and no, it was not worth it. Luckily for us though, we found the loch the next day, and with that I placed my boat down and we got to hunting. We went along the edge of the loch, but I wasn't quite sure if it spawned during the day, and I'd imagine Kelpies would be quite rare anyways. Regardless, that evening, I found not a Kelpie, but a village, and a very nice one at that. As it turns out, I had reached Luss. Day 45 was a rainy day. I put Diorite and Ewan together at the end of this street, and then I went back to hunting. Luss would be my base of operations for now, but as I headed towards the gazebo nearby, it started to thunderstorm. Yeah, so many mobs spawned around me. I had no choice but to run. I quickly got on my boat and rode along the shore, keeping an eye out for the legendary creature. And sure enough, as I looked at this hilltop, I saw it. I knew I had to wait for the right moment, and as I noticed a clearing in the mobs, I went for it. I dodged creatures left and right as I climbed up the hill towards the Kelpie. Only then, it charged at me. I was able to get a hit in, but not before it started to drown me. Yeah, I was down to 2 hearts now. I had no choice but to run. And eventually I towered up. This is when I realized that this one is going to be much more difficult than the Caoineag. Next morning, there were no Kelpies to be seen, so I went to check on my boys, who were doing just fine. I then headed out into the loch, in order to continue my hunt. I made it onto this small island and took a look around. Oh, and I also collected some concrete powder for my base. The search proved to be pointless, and eventually I just headed back to Luss. But I had some trouble finding a vacant home. On day 47, I headed back out once again, and this time, when I couldn't find a Kelpie, I figured that they must spawn either at night or when it's storming. So yeah, I would just have to wait at Luss. Eventually, the sun did set. and the twilight sky revealed itself. I waited on this hill patiently, and slowly but surely, the mobs began to spawn. And it wasn't long until I spotted a dark horse wandering the streets of Luss. So I ran down this hill and approached it. Only the Kelpie and its horde of mobs all started to attack me. And it turned into an all-out chase down the streets of Luss. I took each mob down one by one, but I still couldn't get a clear hit on the Kelpie. That's when I realized just how I would have to defeat this one. I got my Power 2 bow out, and with one clear shot, I ended the Kelpie. It was a beautiful morning in Luss, and I realized that I just had one more creature left. I collected my boys and started our trip home, as the Kelpie had finally been defeated. The next few days were used by travel, as I dropped them off at the base and started my own solo trip north. See, before we head to our last creature, there's a very important location that I wanted to cover, and this trip was certainly cinematic. But while I make my way north, I want to take this moment to thank everyone who helped me in this video. The GoFadaco team did an incredible job with Stirling Castle. My friend Styx captured the village houses of Luss perfectly. My artist Nettle made some truly impressive work for this video. And last, but certainly not least, my mob developers, Poltergeist and Marvinek, absolutely excelled in making the daunting creatures that I've been hunting. I also wanted to take this moment to say thanks to all of you. I've gotten some incredible fan art recently, and stay tuned as I have a lot planned for this holiday season and New Year. But with that being said, let's return to my mysterious trip. I found myself in another large open field on day 54. And I was rather low on food. Luckily for me, some type of structure appeared in the distance. At first I thought it was a village, but I was wrong. I broke as many spawners as I could find, and took all the hay that they had. Now it was time for me to check the large house, which was very much inhabited. I went around the side and broke this window. And yeah, my strategy here was to just take turns shanking each of them. But the next morning, after spotting yet another golf course in the distance, I decided to try for the house again. Only the second floor was full of unfamiliar pillagers. Yeah, it just wasn't worth it, so I left. I went for the coast so I could speed up my travel a bit. And I reached the water that afternoon. My peaceful rowing was then interrupted by something huge in the water, and it looked like a shark. Yeah, I was about to lose my mind until I realized that Scotland isn't known for dangerous sharks. No, but it does have one of the largest sharks out there. See, basking sharks are not only the second largest fish in the ocean, but they are also some of the most harmless sharks out there. This gentle giant can grow up to be 40 feet in length, or 12 meters, and they are known for their huge mouths that act as a filter for what they want to eat. Basking sharks can be found all around the world, but one of the best places to see them in action is right off the Scottish shores. The next day, I kept rowing as I made my way up towards the Orkney Islands. And sorry to my Shetland viewers, but I unfortunately won't be able to include the Shetland Islands in this video. No, instead, the Orkney Islands are the furthest north I'm going. And speaking of which, I had just reached them. I made my way towards the island I was looking for, and, after following the coast, I'd found my destination. Yeah, that's right, 2 wonders in a row, because this is Skara Brae. Over 5,200 years ago, before the pyramids were even built, Skara Brae housed some of our Neolithic ancestors. Right here on the Orkney Islands lived a flourishing village that had furniture, tools, jewelry, and even dice. Yet no weapons have been found by the continuous excavations, which has led historians and archaeologists to believe that 5,200 years ago, the residents of Skara Brae led a rather happy life. I walked along the incredibly well-preserved settlement as the evening sun set in. And the next morning, I started my trip home. See, I think it was worth a side trip. I just couldn't skip something as historically important as Skara Brae. Now with that being said, I took a different route home. And I'm not joking when I say this. I found myself in a valley that might just be one of the most scenic places I have ever been in this series. I finally made it home on the evening of day 58, which means it is once again build time. Day 59 was entirely just mining and digging. But on day 60, I worked on the next golf hole, which I want it to be a big spiral down in this tower. It'll make sense when I finish it. Anyways, it was all coming along nicely. And so the next day, while I work in this golf hole, let me go ahead and reveal my final mythical creature that I will be hunting. Only it's not so much a reveal, as you already know who it is. The Loch Ness monster needs no introduction. As a resident of Loch Ness, this celebrity mythical creature has made the loch a tourist hotspot. The sightings started in 1933, but tales of a monster residing in Loch Ness go all the way back to the 6th century. Nessie was then made famous in 1934 with this photograph that was later proven to be a hoax. But no one can seem to agree on whether or not Nessie is an evil monster or just a passive cryptid. But in this video, we certainly sided with the former. With that being said, day 62 was my last day of base work for now. I started on the underground section of this hole before working on the tower some more. And the next morning, I decided that before I head to Loch Ness, I'm going to climb Ben Nevis with diorite and Ewin. So I went and gathered them. Since the mountain was nearby, we started climbing it in the early afternoon. But yeah, climbing this mountain with the 2 of them was not easy. Ewin definitely had a lot of trouble with the steep terrain. However, right as the sun started to set, we reached the summit. And yeah, the view was incredible. On day 64, I dropped the boys back off at home, as this would be another solo trip. I didn't know what to expect with Nessie, but on the other hand, I would at least get to do this trip in style. Next morning, as I continued my travels north, I found this giant hill in front of me, so naturally I drove my golf cart up it at a very high speed. I reached the top pretty quickly, but I was not smart about it. Yeah, I had to be very careful here. I nudged my way down the hillside, but when I saw an adder nearby, I stopped. It eventually left, so I just kept nudging. But then I saw another adder next to me, so the nudging once again ceased. That is, until I decided to just go for it. Yeah, that was probably the better option, as I had made it pretty far by that afternoon. Yeah, I have no idea why I was doing this on day 66. But little did I know, I was about to come across something pretty interesting, and I know all of you will love it. Yeah, I found a group of Highland cows. Highland cows are known for their long, droopy hair, as this allows them to live in colder environments. These guys are also known to be quite kind, but always err on the side of caution with any animal, especially if you see their calves nearby. I actually got the chance to meet one recently, and Yeah, I look a little bit weird in this photo, and the cow seems entirely uninterested in saying hi to me. But that certainly doesn't hinder their lovable reputation. The rest of day 66 was pretty boring, and the same can be said for day 67. I did see another tower, so I just climbed up this one and flooded it with water. Anyways, I continued on my way, knowing that I was nearing my destination. And so, the next morning, as I drove over this hill and spotted a huge loch in the distance, I reckoned I had arrived. Just to be sure, I made my way down the hill and started rowing in the loch. Soon enough, a castle appeared in the distance, confirming that I had reached Loch Ness. Loch Ness is Scotland's largest loch by volume, and is one of the deepest as well. In fact, its depth of over 780 feet, or 240 meters, keeps it constantly cold throughout the year. Those with thalassophobia should probably tune out, as something that makes the hunt for Nessie so difficult is the fact that most of this deep water is pitch black. Returning to the surface, however, we have one more thing to cover, and that is Urquhart, or Urquhart Castle. Much like Stirling Castle, Urquhart Castle was essential to the wars of Scottish independence in the 14th century. After the English captured it in 1296, Robert the Bruce then regained the castle in 1306, and the King of Scots left a lasting impact on this site, as it was the only castle in the Highlands that was not captured by the English after his death. I briefly looked around Urquhart before deciding to set up a camp nearby. I tried to see if I could make scuba gear, but yeah, no luck. So instead, I did what I very much did not want to do. I headed straight into the loch and dove down. Yeah, this was terrifying. Next morning I came up with an idea. I crafted some doors before heading back down underwater. I then placed a door and, yeah, it really was just pitch black in front of me. Only I then saw something swimming nearby, but it turned out to just be a turtle. Regardless, I waited in the murky depths. And yeah, I was surrounded by nothing but darkness and silence. Only then, I got a glimpse of a nightmare. I immediately swam up, but it took so long to reach the surface. I swam fast for my boat as I could hear it beneath me. And as soon as I got in my boat, I rowed away fast. And yeah, I just kept rowing. Now, at the time of recording this, I had a really bad cold, so I don't have any in-game voice, but I can assure you that I was losing my mind. But my terror wasn't over, as I soon saw this happen. After an initial retreat, I decided to double back and approach it, and it hit me hard. Yet, as I rode away, I got my first proper look at the Loch Ness monster. The next day, I knew I had to head back out. But it wasn't where I had last seen it, so I just kept rowing and looking for the creature. Unfortunately for me, my search soon ended. Except this time, it fully leapt from the water. And yeah, I was once again hit hard. But I needed to get at least one hit on it. So I got in close, but I couldn't figure out where to hit it. And that's when I almost died. Yeah, I rode away as fast as I could. As I reached Urquhart, I realized that I either needed better stuff or a proper plan. Either way, I just wasn't ready. So I reluctantly got in my cart and headed east, hoping to find a structure of some kind to help me. Yeah, I needed to regroup a bit. So on day 71, I made my way through this forest, aiming to just see what was out there. I saw another castle structure in the distance, and decided to go for it. I carefully snuck my way past these knights, but when it started storming, I just went to sleep. And the next morning, I continued my search through the castle, looking for anything that would be helpful. But the chests were all empty, so yeah, it was just kinda useless. That evening, I made my way further east through this forest, as I thought about a plan for taking down Nessie. I found a loch on day 73 and followed this connecting river. I went through some truly amazing scenery, before realizing that I was in a much colder area. But the mountains ahead of me told me that this wasn't just any area. I was in one of the UK's most naturally stunning national parks. The Cairngorms National Park hosts not only 4 of the 5 tallest mountains in the United Kingdom, but also an array of wildlife, as according to the Cairngorm National Park Authority, this park hosts about 1/4 of the rare and endangered species in the UK. This of course includes the Scottish wildcat. In short, this national park is a haven for wildlife, and it is truly stunning. I looked around the park for a bit, and the next morning, I decided to climb the mountains before me. It definitely took a while to traverse these steep slopes, but when I finally made it to the top, I continued along the top of this ridge here. And you know what? This is where I decided that even if I do die to Nessie in this episode, I honestly won't care. This is a very non-traditional channel, with a very non-traditional series. So, if I die, I won't have survived 100 days, but that's never really the focus, is it? But on day 75, I woke up with a plan. Now for this plan, I'll need to stop by my base. So I got in my golf cart and started descending the mountain. Only the berry bushes made that a difficult venture, so I descended by foot, until I could finally use my golf cart. On day 76, I made it home midday. I got what I needed, which was my overpowered bow. I couldn't stop myself from doing some quick touch-ups while I was here. But never mind that, as the next morning, I headed to the loch via an alternate route, right near Ben Nevis. I had to do this mostly on foot, and that afternoon, I climbed this large mountain. But finally, on day 78, I had rode my way back into Loch Ness. Yet, as a testament to the loch's massive size, I didn't even reach Urquhart until that night. On day 79, I set up camp in this Tower of Urquhart. See, my plan was simple. I was going to lead the Loch Ness monster towards the castle and then shoot at it from this tower. But that did, in fact, involve me heading back into the loch in order to lead it. I rode for a while with no sign of Nessie, so I decided to head down into the water, and yeah, that didn't really help. However, it wasn't until I went north of Urquhart that I would finally find my target. Now I had to act as bait in order to lead it. Only it wasn't surfacing. Until it did. Anyways, the sun was setting, so I had to act fast. However, it finally seemed to be following me, and as it turned out, we were right near Urquhart. So I put my plan into action, and I did some shooting. But that's when I noticed a rather serious problem. The arrows were bouncing off of it. So the next morning, I knew I needed a change of plans. And I only had one other idea. If I could somehow sneak a boat under it while it performs its leap into the air, I could hopefully trap it on the boat, or at least give it some fall damage. Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, but I had no better plan. With that being said, I headed out to try it. But I just couldn't get it close enough. In fact, it was doing a lot of damage to me instead. That is, until I got my window. Yeah, this was it. I was literally about to die. I took some time to heal up, and I tried again. But it just wasn't working, and the sun was already starting to go down. So I tried again the next morning. But to no avail. I tried leaning it closer to the land, but it seemed to be stuck in the deeper waters. I just wasn't about to give up though. I went and I tried yet again, and got the same outcome. So that left me with no choice. I was about to risk it all. I placed the boat below it, but this time I got in the boat, and I just started attacking. I had to time these blocks perfectly, but eventually, after multiple solid hits, I had defeated the Loch Ness monster. The next day, I took a side trip to the Cairngorms one last time. Yeah, I drove my way there and made it to the park on the evening of day 83. I woke up the next morning freezing, so I crafted some wool clothes and I climbed up one last time. I made it to one of my favorite views and then walked along the top of the mountains, knowing that I had successfully hunted 4 of Scotland's most famous mythical creatures. And I really thought I was going to lose to Nessie, but I managed to pull it off. And with that being said, the last thing ahead of me was my base review on day 99, so I began my journey home. Next few days involved a lot of travel, mostly on foot. But while I make my journey home, I'll go ahead and rate Scotland's difficulty. Now Scotland was a place that I knew would be easier, given its lack of large predatory animals. And when I go to rate the difficulty of these places, I want to do so independently of the mythical creatures that may reside there. And so, truth be told, Scotland was just lovely. The landscapes, the wildlife, even the temperature and the weather. Therefore, Scotland is tied with Hawaii for a difficult rating of 6 out of 10. Now let's join me back on my base, so I can finish it up in time for my base review. I made it home on the rainy evening of day 92, and I did some mining, before finishing the final hole the next day. I also started on the exit to the course, which I would then finish on day 94. The rest of this day was spent fixing the holes and collecting leaves. And the next day I collected some wood, and placed these leaves. Today was General Decoration Day, that is until a group of pillagers arrived that afternoon. But I took care of them pretty quickly. Anyways, day 96 was more leaf and wood collecting. I finished the shrubberies, before then finishing the top of this tower. Then the next morning, I made these cobblestone slabs, that I then placed as castle ridges. I also took care of my mob infestation, as I didn't want my imaginary visitors to have to hear undead knights while they golfed. That brings me to day 98, the final day of work before base review. I set up each course before adding the finishing touches. I also cleaned up my workspace and put it in the room with Ewan and diorite, which I now claimed as my bedroom as well. Regardless, day 99 had arrived, and that meant it was time to do some base reviewing. I went to each hole and I gave it a shot. On hole 1, I scored 8, which isn't too good. Hole 2, however, was impossible, as for some reason, the golf ball didn't want to go through a 1-block space. Yeah, I should have tested this, but When I made it to hole 3, I decided to just replace the ball on the other side of the bridge, which makes my final score for that hole 7. Hole 4 is the easiest, as I got 5. And as expected, the 5th hole was the hardest, as I maxed out my swings. With that being said, I'm rating my base on 3 categories this time: the courses themselves, the design, and the overall functionality. The courses were actually not bad. They looked pretty cool, and I liked the blocks that I chose for each part of them. Therefore, the design is lifted by that aspect, but the design of the rest of the base does have some flaws. It's very much all a facade, meaning that if you look close enough, you'll see a lot of unfinished areas. Last but not least, the functionality. Yeah, unfortunately, I have to give this a lower score, as the courses didn't exactly work as intended. So, to sum it all up, I give my Scotland base a pretty mediocre 6.5 out of 10. Yeah, not bad, but not great. And with that, there is still one more day. I woke up on day 100 and spent some time with my boys, before heading down to this loch. While I swam around, I thought about the last 100 days and just what kind of place Scotland had been. See, Scotland is unique in the fact that it's both a natural gem of Europe and a cultural one. With a vast and almost infinite history, this land holds castles that are centuries old, traditions that date back even further, and of course folklore that is both ancient and new. But all that's just to say that there is no shortage of things to do and see in Scotland. So, if you end up going, go and see all of it, as there really is no place like Scotland. And with that being said, it is about that time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.